Hello and welcome to AQA GCSE Sociology Functionalism. Functionalists are probably the most important sociologists because they're some of the oldest too in terms of when they started writing. Their ideas really influence the vast majority of sociology, and a lot of the sociologists that came afterwards were critics of functionalism. So we need to look at functionalists in terms of the human body and their analogy for society as being like a human body. All of the social structures within the body are organs, if you like. So if a social institution within society gets sick or fails, the rest of society, the rest of the body suffers or even dies. So sociologists who are functionalists tend to be concerned with social cohesion, with norms and values reflecting a society. So the way a society behaves or is structured will be down to what that society values and what it believes is right. And you can see that throughout history. It seems quite a logical argument when you look at it that way. So if you're talking about the caste system or slavery or feudalism or any of those social structures, you may argue, well, it reflected that society at the time. The other ideas that you may want to think about are the warm bath theory and the symmetrical family, both coming from ideas around socialization and roles within the family, and we'll get into those later, but those are the key ideas when it comes to functionalism. The two important studies when it comes to functionalist views of families is Parsons' Social Structure of the Family from 1959 and Wilmot and Young's The Symmetrical Family in 1973. Now both studies built on the work of Durkheim being very prolific and writing about many different topics. But the functionalist position on the family is that the nuclear family is the best type of family for society because it's the most common and because it has balance. You have the conjugal roles of the female at home doing all of the housework, the man being the breadwinner, so he is the instrumental role, the woman is the expressive role. This also allows children to be socialized with male and female role models, if you like, or archetypes, people to copy, people to be taught the right way to be male or female in society. So Parsons was writing at the end of the 50s, the early 60s. You may want to look at the Life magazine cover there to get a feel for what life was like. American families had two basic functions: primary socialization of children and stabilizing their adult personalities, which goes hand in hand with what I was just talking about. That's very much Parsons' ideas. He came up with the warm bath theory, that the nuclear family is an escape from the stresses of life. You know, you spend all week at work or all week doing the housework, and then the weekends you have leisure time, and that was something that was very much happening in American society at that time. And this can be transposed really nicely onto British society. It's where you start looking more globally that perhaps Parsons comes into problems. Wilmot and Young were looking in London and Great Britain a little while later in 1973. They interviewed 2,000 people. So unlike a lot of functions like Durkheim would use big data, they're using interviews here, although for a lot of people. And they found that similar contributions were made by each spouse, by the husband and the wife in running the household. Shared chores, shared decisions. So no longer was it the man of the house and the little housewife, as it were, in stereotyped terms. In Britain, in London, they were seeing this more symmetrical family type. You may want to question the types of people that were being studied here and how reflective they were in terms of a sample for the rest of society. But generally speaking, families within functionalist views, it's all about the nuclear family, and any other family type is not necessarily wrong, but it will be inferior because it won't provide the socialization, it won't provide the support or the income of two people. So think very traditionally when you think of family roles here. The functionalist view of education ties in really well with the view of family. So if the family provides primary socialization, education provides secondary socialization. It's a bridge. Durkheim, when writing in 1925, talked about moral education, and the major function of education is the transmission, the passing on of society's norms and values. So that job starts with your parents, they're the primary socializers, and then at the school, the classroom, that experience throughout your formative years, that's secondary socialisation. That teaches you what society expects of you. School provides a context in which children learn to cooperate outside of their family and their friends. So they have to get on with other people, they have to have social cohesion. Parsons built on this in 1961 when he linked it to class and social system. The school class as a social system. School is a bridge between the family and society. So you start off in the home as a toddler, you go to a school, you're taken outside of the home setting, and the classroom does exactly what Durkheim has described there. This is a key belief though here. Schools are meritocratic. Status is achieved. You're given every opportunity to succeed at school, and how you do in your exams essentially determines what kind of job you get, what kind of life you lead. So this is where the functionalists build on the ideas around family, and they really embed the idea of meritocracy in society. So it does link to social class because of that. It does link to life chances. It does link to outcomes and values. It's really important you understand that the new right built upon functionalist ideas, and the two studies which really move into the new right ideas around education are both by Ball, writing in 1981 and 1994. So Ball started off looking as a participant observer, much like Willis, in a comprehensive school, looking at ideas around socialisation of two cohorts. One was banded, one was mixed ability. And this built on studies of more schools looking at marketisation and parental choice. So the new right took functionalist ideas and essentially applied them more to the middle class, and the idea that the better informed you are, the more involved you are in your child's education and what the school does, and holding the school accountable is better for your child. So in an essay on education, you may want to compare the functionalist and new rights because they are different, yet they're a continuation of each other's views, if you like. So it's more of a subtle top-end idea, but if you can understand the new right ideas and understand they're slightly different to functionalists, that will get you really good marks. The idea that the functionalists are sort of ultra-orthodox, ultra-traditional is a bit odd here with their views on crime and deviance. Now, Durkheim wrote about crime and he wrote about suicide, two really influential studies, and he studied both rates of crime and rates of suicide across Europe and tried to look at reasons for that. So big data, lots of comparative method, lots of social science, as it were. And this was built on by Merton, who in 1938 talked about anomie, and he built on Durkheim's idea of anomie and made it much more specific to crime. The idea that when people feel they're not part of society, or society is breaking down or leaving them behind, they don't have the opportunity to achieve. So if you take the idea of the American dream and the idea of meritocracy from education, when that doesn't come to fruition for people, they look towards deviant or criminal ways to make more money, to get better status, to get more power in society. So you can make a link there to Weber as well. Cohen focused specifically on boys, working class boys, and the idea of delinquency. So the idea that boys go and commit crime to fulfill their status. They get frustrated, they can't succeed, they don't work in school, and they go out and they commit crimes, violent crimes like fighting, vandalism, stealing, burglary, and this came from the mods and the rockers. Two rival gangs, dressed differently, both rode bikes and scooters, the mods riding the scooters, the rockers riding the bikes, and there was a big moral panic from clashes where huge groups fought each other and targeted each other, and this wasn't portrayed in any way other than youth and youth crime and youth delinquency. Now, what functionalists say, coming from Durkheim's studies all the way through, is that crime is good for society because it allows us to adjust our own norms and values. As certain things become considered deviant or criminal, or no longer considered deviant or criminal, our values change and move with what society wants and society needs. Therefore, crime can be really useful. So if you think about what a criminal looks like, you might draw a stereotyped image in your head, but the reality will be very different. And that's essentially what functionalists are trying to explain. So you may want to think about ideas of conformity, you may want to think about ideas of frustration and deprivation, and how that can push different people to crime. and why functionalists may focus more on men through instinct rather than any particular reason. Men, obviously, when functionalists were writing, men had a much more control in society, much more power, and with that comes more risk of crime. As you'd expect, the functionalist views on social stratification is that a class system is necessary. So Davis and Moore, writing straight after the Second World War on class status and power, said it was a universal necessity. Every society throughout history, throughout the world, had some sort of social stratification, had some people in groups. And that kind of makes sense. Even in a tribe, you will have hierarchies, you will have a chief. And in modern society, you'll have those with ambition encouraged to compete for the most. So that, again, this idea of a chief status, of a talent pool, of meritocracy, comes from Davis and Moore in 1945. So you can see that right through education, right through socialization as a functionalist mainstay. Merton saw society as unbalanced because of the importance given to success. So all of the ways that people respond to the American society and if you like, the American dream can be forms of enemy. So they might conform to what society wants to get power and success. They might rebel. They might innovate and become an entrepreneur. They might totally retreat from society and find their own success and become some sort of social outcast. Or they might look to ritualism. And there makes me think of religion more than anything else, and retreatism. But that's sort of irrelevant for the scope of GCSE. What you need to know is there are different ways to achieve success, and the structure of society dictates what success is and how people can move up and down it. And really, the most deserving have the most success. That's the meritocratic view. Now we need to bring in the new right view here, because again, as with education, the new right build on functionalist ideas later on. So Murray in 1984 wrote about American society's underclass and what we might call the precariat today. He said Britain was then developing the same issues. Social security, welfare state benefits meant people didn't care anymore. They didn't have to try and succeed. They would get handouts. They would live off welfare. Murray was very controversial. He's walked away from this a little bit, but people still cite him because it was such an important study. And this is really where the new right take the ideas of meritocracy, and rather than look at the successful people in society, they look at the people who are very much not successful. So you can see this is a good contrast to functionalism, and again, for the higher ability students, really a subtle building upon functionalism. And showing that in your essays will be really good, will really appeal to the examiner. So try and learn the differences and add those to you. I hope this has been really useful, and I hope that you understand functionalism. Do try and include it in every part of your exams. Do try and show that functionalism is obviously very different to the rest of sociology in many ways, and very informative. So use it as a good starting point to contrast and balance other views against.